Hi, my name is Maritere Rodriguez Velas. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a woman and a Latina. I am Puerto Rican and American. My family is from Puerto Rico. I speak English, Spanish, elementary to mid French. This is what looking bilingual means to me.
But I'm really glad that we've connected, but I'm also really glad that we've had the opportunity to talk because so much of our work intersects, and it's incredible how you could be doing similar work, but also it's so different, and the way that you approach it is so different. So that's what I really love about your story that you shared with me. But let's take it back, since this is a season about parenthood. Can you tell us a little bit more about your family?
So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I went to school I came to California to get a master's degree, and I ended up meeting my husband of 40 years. He is Greek American, and so all of a sudden we had GreekeRican children.
Puerto
Uh,
Rican!
yeah,
I
that's
love
how
it!
we used to call them when they were growing up. They were GreekeRicans, and so yeah, my children are 31 and 34. They are bilingual. Not perfect, but they are bilingual. We were lucky, privileged enough. I mean, blessed to be able to go to Puerto Rico every summer since they were 8 months old. I started traveling with them when they were 8 months old. And I would just park myself in my mom and my dad's house for 2 months. And, my sister and my brother, we all had kids at the same time. So there were 8 grandkids all together. And it was great because the Puerto Rican kids wanted to learn English and my kids wanted to learn Spanish. So it
Yeah.
was a mishmash of, English and Spanish the whole 2 months that we were there. And it was wonderful. I got to be very close to my nieces and my nephew, and my sister got very close to my children and my brother too. And so, now all these kids are adults. There's quite a few that are parents, and yeah.
And that actually brings me to my next question. We had such a great conversation around the subject of home and what that means. You talked a little bit about the evolution of the meaning of home for you. So can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, it took me a long time. I think that in my yearbook in high school, I was voted the one that will never leave. Because I'm
Really?
so close to my family, and I was the one that left. But uh, life has a way of surprising you, and I wanted to go to school away from my parents or my home to experience other places, but I never thought of not going back.
Right.
It was always for a temporary thing, and I would always come back. So um I had the opportunity to study in Europe for 2 years, and I couldn't I should have stayed maybe the 4 years, but it was hard. It was hard to be away. I
Yeah.
miss I miss my family. It was also a different time. I think had this all happened today, it
Mhm.
would have been easier because of the Zoom meetings,
Connecting.
and the
Yeah.
FaceTime, and all the things that technology is able to help you with,
Yeah.
to stay connected and feel close to your family.
Mhm.
But I didn't have any of that. I had conversations with my parents over the phone. It wasn't easy from the little island all the way to Switzerland. So we maybe talked once a month. So it was different. It was a different time, and I
Especially
was
for somebody
homesick.
that was voted most likely to not leave the island, right? Or least likely to leave the
I
island.
know.
That's going
No,
to once a month conversation with your, how did your family react to that?
It was hard for them too, it was hard. But my parents were super happy for the opportunity. I mean, I was traveling everywhere. I mean, I treasure that time of my life as well. I feel like, my parents gave me this amazing opportunity and I took advantage of it. And uh, like I was telling you last week when we chatted, I think I was 18 when I was there, and I realized, wow, all these cultures, all this,
Yeah.
languages, and children around me spoke 3 and 4 languages without, skipping a beat. And I was like, oh my God,
So
I learned
envious.
I learned English when I was in 3rd grade. I wasn't born learning English or knowing English or being, spoken to in English. So
Right.
I learned it in school, and these little kids were like, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they were speaking 3 and 4 languages, and I was fascinated by that. And it was, I mean, I made great friends and it was a great opportunity, but I missed home. And so I went back home. I finished my degree, and
Mhm.
then I end up in California. So again, I'm switching homes.
Yeah.
And which I thought was temporarily. And I ended up meeting my husband, and he really wanted to stay in California. And kicking and screaming, I stayed because I loved him, and I thought, this was the love of my life, and I had to follow him, and I wanted to, but it was really hard. I think it took me, we didn't have children for about 5 years after we got married, and I want to say my son was probably 4 or 5
Yeah.
when on one of those trips going back to California from Puerto Rico, I made a comment in the airplane saying, oh, it'll be great to be back home. And my husband looks at me and he's like, you mean California? And I said, yeah, back home. And I just, a matter of fact, I didn't even think about
Yeah.
it. And he said to me, this is the first time since we live in California that you have called California home.
That's so interesting. Do you know what do you think, I guess, or maybe you actually know, what do you think was that thing you needed? Was it time? Was it having your children there growing up? They're like, what do you think that was?
I think it was, things change when you have children, and when your children start school and
Mm,
you start meeting other parents, and you kind of like all of a sudden find your tribe, your community, people that have same if same values and same interests, and you start bonding with these people.
yeah. Mhm.
All of a sudden you feel like you belong. Like, okay, I'm okay here. I belong here. I just always put a lot of value in friendship. So I think that's what happened. I all of a sudden felt like I belonged. I had a community of
Yeah.
people. I had different sets of groups,
Mhm.
different groups that they all fulfilled that, something in my heart. And it was it wasn't exactly the same, but it was close to it.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
you
you had
know,
redefined it, it sounds like. It had evolved for you, what that was to be evolved for you because of your needs, because of your family, because of, your husband, your children, just, their individual needs, and how you all grew together. And you also talked about um the different, and in this case, and probably other groups as well, but the different Latino communities that your children were exposed to and how that affected their Latinidad, which I completely relate to, having grown up on the mainland. So what are some examples of how your children were impacted by those other communities of Latinos?
well, I think that, if you know LA at all, the distances are not like, so we were not neighbors. So, we actually had to plan on, we're going to see each other. But we try to see each other at least 3 or 4 times a month.
Mhm.
And we always had the kids with us. Every single get together that we had, tú sabes, siempre, the families or the friends are always around. It was always around food, always.
Obviously.
So exactly.
Otherwise, I'm not
And it was
coming.
always a birthday or an anniversary, or
Yeah.
we just wanted to get together and, I cook this weekend and you cook the next weekend or whatever. So my kids were exposed to the Argentinian food, the Peruvian food, the Mexican food, and, Mexican food in LA is pretty big. So all of a sudden, all that, and then the accents, the different accents of people talking
Yes.
Spanish. And my husband was the only, English dominant.
Yeah.
So, we always call him the token Greek because the token American or the token English, speaking person in the group. I mean, we all spoke English because of him. We never wanted him to feel left out.
Sure.
But in a little corner over here, if the ladies were in the kitchen, we were all speaking in Spanish. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were exposed to all that, and it was great. It was like, the best of everything. They were
Yeah.
not only being raised with the Greek culture and the Puerto Rican and the American, but they were exposed to these other cultures. I think that's
Mhm.
that's why they I'm convinced that they are the people that they are today because of that multicultural upbringing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you know, somebody that grew up also in a very multicultural location with other, in this case, Latinidades around me, what I love about that is that we are defining a new generation. So while in my, using my case, while I'm Puerto Rican and Cuban, by my family, even though I was born in the mainland, I was growing up with people from a lot of different places in Latinidad that were related enough that we understood fundamentally, like we had some things in common, whether it was like through religion or culture or food or whatever it was, there was something there that felt different than with our American counterparts. So it's what I call, that pan Latin experience. And so I'm like, yeah, when you hear me talk in Spanish, I sound pan Caribbean, right? Pan Latin. Like my Spanish is influenced by other countries, by other things I heard around me. It's not just the accent or the language of my family. Of course, I don't sound like I'm from the island because I'm not, right? Like that's different. How that shows up is really different.
Sometimes I do the lives, Instagram lives in Spanish or the for the podcast,
Mhm.
and oftentimes my sister would send me messages saying, "You need to sound more Puerto Rican. You're sounding Mexican or you're sounding Argentine, whatever."
Ah,
And it's because se me pegan todos los acentos. I mean,
mhm.
I can just, maybe that's why languages came easy to me. I have
And
that
it's not
thing.
conscious, right? It's just like, oh,
No,
we're around something long enough and it starts to really like influence you. And I tell people this because when I lived in Spain, I'm not gonna say I started to sound more Spanish because that's definitely not true, but the cadence of my like the song that we sing when we speak,
I'm sure you did. Yes.
my accent I wasn't suddenly using the, right? Like that's not natural to me, but also my English changed. So it's not a matter of what's your language that maybe you don't have as polished. My English also changed because I was teaching English. So I was making sure I was a lot clearer when I spoke and slowed down. But I also was around a lot of people that were Brits. And so next thing you know, again, I'm not adopting a British accent, but I was definitely saying things like, oh yeah, let's go to the cinema. What? Like people did not say that in the, do not say that in the States. And like so that I'd come back here and people would be like, why do you sound like a Disney princess? Why do you sound so strange? It was just this really funny experience to just be around other things. And yeah, people don't realize how impactful that could be, even in languages that you're very comfortable in. So I want to segue this into what you do, because I feel like you're dropping hints that you're a very knowledgeable person in this area. So can you tell us a little bit about how your current work and your personal life ended up intertwining?
Well, so this is over 2 decades ago now. When I was raising my kids, trying to figure out how to balance the cultures and the three cultures and the two languages. I didn't have, I could, I didn't have Google where I could go and Google, how to balance cultures and language. No. So I was concerned about it. And, bilingualism wasn't a topic that people were talking about, or if it was being talked about, it wasn't in a good light.
Right.
So I would go to the park and I would talk to my kids in Spanish, and people would look at me like, although I know that that still happens today, but we've gone,
We've
a
gotten,
lot
we've gotten further.
farther.
Mhm.
And it was, I struggled with it, and I happened to discuss it with my husband one day, and he's like, you have a master's degree in communications, you're educated, you're bilingual, biliterate, you speak, write and read, you also do it in French. If you're having this insecurities and this concerns, think of the immigrant parent that is moving here, that doesn't have the education that you have, that is also trying to find this balance and this adaptation and this adjustment. So I said, okay, where are you going with all this? And he's like, why don't you write about it, become a resource for these parents? So ended up writing for La Opinion newspaper that I had mentioned to you, for 12 years. I had a weekly column. They syndicated it, and I ended up in Chicago also for 5 years and started writing for Set Padres magazine, which still exists today. Healthy Kids in Espanol, that was available at the time. But it was also very interesting to me that unless I went to the pediatrician's office, I couldn't find these magazines in Spanish with any kind of parenting advice in Spanish either. Because, but let's face it, we're not only talking about the language and the cultures, but the parenting situation.
Mm. What do
Parenting
you mean
is,
by that? What do you mean by the parenting situation?
well, when you become a parent and you're trying to raise your children, there's a lot of layers there.
Mm.
Now you're adding the layer of the language,
Yeah.
preserving the language, and the layer of preserving the cultures. And it was like, all of a sudden your bag of tricks for parenting becomes fuller and bigger. And
Yeah,
you're
and
like,
more than the
oh,
average person probably around you.
so that's what I try to do with the column. Everything that was happening in my house with my children in terms of language and culture, and whatever parenting situation that I thought, the immigrant parent could benefit from. I would write about that, and I would go to the library or talk to an expert and would add on the facts of, whatever the topic was. So I would give the parents even, a little bit more information, perhaps a little bit more education as to, this is why this is happening, and this is what I would do if I was you, and give them tips and suggestions
Yeah.
and offer tools
Yeah.
that were not readily available.
Yeah, connecting them to
So
those resources so that they could, and it sounds to me like also to the idea of someone sees you, people do have this need and this availability of resources. Let's connect folks and let's create this community. Let's make this community well known.
So I started doing that in the, with the newspaper and the magazine articles, and that evolved into writing My first book, Raising Bilingual Children, was published in Spanish and in English by Simon and Schuster, which opened a lot of doors for me. I'm super grateful. But it was an ebook. So, but all of a sudden, I was having access to, I was invited to language conferences and to parenting groups to speak to parents and all that. So, realized that I needed a physical book because, parents wanted to walk away with a book. So
Yeah.
then came my Arroz con Pollo and Apple Pie, Raising Bicultural Children book. And that was also published in English and in Spanish. And from then I started writing bilingual children's books. So my whole, life is around, I have this mission because I didn't have these resources. I really want parents like you to have these resources. And now with social media,
Yeah.
the community has, is bigger and bigger, and there's a lot more interest because there's a lot more education. We know better now. We have scientific proof that we should be raising bilingual children or multilingual children. And there is not only there's not only a big community now of young parents like you that are really committed to raising a bilingual child and preserving the Spanish, but there is a big Caucasian English dominant parents that are educated that know this is a gift. This is a benefit. Even if I don't speak it, I want my kid to speak it. So, there's these two communities, and I try to offer resources to both in English and in Spanish because that's what I've been doing for the last 2 decades. And it's so much more it's a lot easier now with social media. You can share all this stuff. And there's a whole bunch of, linguists, young education, moms in education, moms that are linguists, that are offering a lot of resources, moms that are teachers that teach Spanish, that are bilingual teachers. I mean, we didn't have a whole bunch of this.
Yeah. Yeah. The heritage
So,
language resources, especially when we're talking about
yes.
being
So
here and
now
having.
it's, and in my personal life, my life revolves around English because that's just what my kids speak to each other. That's what I speak with my husband. So I try to find the Spanish everywhere else I go with my friends that I still have of my friends of 30 years. And also, to be honest, everything I watch on Netflix, I'm like, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I watch Netflix. All the series that I watch, everything I watch is in Spanish. And
With that connection back to home, it's bringing
in it,
back home.
even if it's dubbed, and I started doing that 2 years ago because I realized that my whole world was still in English, even though I create content in Spanish. But oftentimes I found myself texting my sister saying, "Hey, what is the word for this in Spanish?" And so I decided, you know what, I have to, go back to listening to more Spanish. And even if it's a dubbed, like I watch Turkish series because I think their plot is great. The acting is superb.
The telenovelas are mostly
Me encantan. I love them. Now I'm into the Korean ones now, and I'm like, so they are so sweet. I told my sister, but they're so sweet. I mean, this is what I need to see after working all day. I just want something sweet and a cute little message. So it's interesting because I'm sitting there watching, and sometimes the dubbing is like I roll my eyes thinking, wait, this is not what they meant. But it's forcing me to really, pay attention and
engage.
to And it's reminding me of words that I haven't used in a while, and I love it. So.
And potentially, and this is something that I had never thought of. In my first season, I have a Puerto Rican friend. He moved to the States when he was 14. And he goes back off and his mother lives over there. He's, I think, 28 or 29 now. I'm not sure. But he told me that when he goes back to Puerto Rico, people are like, "Oh, that word is very 2001." Like he's like finding that people are like, "Wow, where did you like you're talking like a little dated." And he's like, "That's ridiculous. I'm 30 years old or however old he is, young, right? Like on the younger end to be feeling that." So I feel like it's also interesting. And having lived abroad, while I didn't experience that, having lived abroad, I know that coming back here helps me get up to date with some pop culture, some terms that I wasn't catching over there, even on the internet, I wasn't catching. So do you find that when you're watching these telenovelas or these shows or whatever they are, that you're also maybe like not only remembering, but updating words that maybe you just...
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. And then, I love the Colombian series too. Y me
Okay.
encanta because then I tend to compare like, oh, we would not say it this way. We would say it that way. So, and of course, I talk to my Peruvian friends all the time in español, and my Argentinian friends in español y
Yeah.
todo, pero I just felt like I needed that extra, and in fact, the other day I was thinking, I should be doing this with French because I don't get to practice my French at all. And anyway, so that's
No,
our
this
different
is
story.
amazing. And I love that and it's funny because when I do like my consulting side and I'm talking to people about learning languages, one of the tips I give them, and this is something that I started doing because of me, I was like, listen, yo aprendí español de mi abuela. Mi abuela is not talking about Facebook. I mean, ahora sí, but like not like, historically, right? So things like well, I was like, is update the same when you're talking about the internet? What's a cover photo called on the back of Facebook? There were all these technological terms que yo no aprendí de mi abuela because she's gonna be 87. Like that's not the world she grew up in. And it's not something that she does now. So I changed all my technology to Spanish, including my Facebook, including my Instagram. And then eventually when I had, some my brain's switching languages. So I'm thinking some control over the language, but that's not what I mean to say. But you know what I mean? When
I
I
know.
was understanding better technological vocabulary in Spanish, I then switched it to Catalan because I was in Barcelona for those 8 years. And that was how I informed myself about vocabulary that otherwise I wasn't gonna learn that. Like maybe in the street, right? In the
Yes,
street learning. Somebody
yes.
says, about, actualizando su, ¿cómo se llama? La foto de cobertura, or I don't know, I forget what it's called, or whatever it is. But I'm like, oh, like I wouldn't have known that. So it's also really helpful in that way. So I support your French journey. I think you need to.
I know, but
doing this.
you just said two words that I have been coming up a lot, actualizando y tendencia. I didn't know how do you translate trending? Y lo oí en uno de estos programas y era tendencia, and like, that's it. Oh my God, I learned a new word.
Yeah, it's like when you learn back, like not backwards, but maybe kind of backwards. And there's
Yes.
also when I was in Spain, and again, this is because I grew up at home speaking Spanish, and the neighborhood I grew up in had letreros in Spanish. Like I grew up in a Latino neighborhood, so like you could go around there and not speak English straight up. But when I was in Spain, there were adult things that I was not talking about as a kid either, like politics and seafood at a restaurant. So guess what? And how to cook and how to ask for things cooked in a certain way. So those are things that like I actually learned, not politics, but food and like preparation of food and like the different things that I liked or didn't like. I dominate that better than I do in English because I learned it first in Spanish.
Wow, very cool.
Sense? Yeah. And so it's funny because now when I go to a restaurant in English and I want some sort of seafood, I'm like, oh, which one was this one? Because it's funny, I'd have to like just try it over there because translating to English didn't help because I didn't know it in English. So, I don't know, I can't think of a fish, but like, this, I'm like, I don't know what that is. Okay, I'll try it. Oh, I like it. Okay, now I'm here and I'm like, how do I get that you know, how do I get that fish? I don't know what fish that was. So
Camarones, gambas.
no, más complicado que eso. Actually, are they razor clams or is that a bad translation? Is that a thing in English?
Mm,
I think when I would look it up, it would come up as razor clams, and it's still not clear to me if that's true or not. But there was something, oh, berberechos. Berberechos, ¿cómo se dicen en inglés?
sí, pero yo no uso, I don't use that word, so sí,
So
yo
that's
sé.
funny because then my
Yeah.
seafood is also probably impacted by that, but then I
Yes.
had no foundation for that in and in English. None.
Yeah, I remember the item thing. I think it was the first time that we were cooking and my Peruvian friend called, ¿tienes una palta? Palta, ¿quieres palta? Y yo la miro y le digo, ¿qué es una palta? Y me dice, an avocado. And I'm like, okay. Yo le
Oh,
digo, sí, se dice palta. Pero yo le digo aguacate. I had no
I
idea.
didn't know there was another word for that.
Yes.
What do you say to someone who says, my kid doesn't want to speak Spanish to me? What do I do?
I'll ask him to go buy my book. No, just kidding.
And here it is. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
What's the
Well, the book,
simplest answer? That I know that it's more
yeah,
complex than that, right? Like
yeah.
that's
It's
otherwise you and I wouldn't have jobs. So, but what is the simplest kind of response to that you
the
can say?
simplest kind of response is do not make them do it. Do not make them feel bad about it. Do not judge or criticize. Just, continue talking to him in Spanish. He wants to continue to talk in English, and as the kid's maturity level, as the child matures, you can have conversations with the child about why this is so important to you. But I think that the key is the sooner we start being committed to raising kids with Spanish or speaking Spanish at home, the sooner the child is going to realize this is the way it is, and it's like a normal thing. And in my house we speak Spanish, and outside the door we speak English. And when I walk by back to the house, I speak Spanish again. So parents have to lower their expectations, and if they're committed, they're committed. And that doesn't mean like, sometimes in this happens, because it happens. If your world is also English dominant, inevitably sometimes your child is going to walk in and maybe you just finished talking to a friend of yours in English, and you're going to reply or say something in English to the child. And don't beat yourself up. It's okay. I always tell the parents, commitment plus consistency plus connection plus flexibility.
Nice.
That equals happy bilingual children. You have to be flexible. You have to, there's this mental load that the parents, because now we have a name for it. If you watch my video tomorrow, my little video consejito, it's about that. How I didn't know what that was called. Now we have a name for it. But how I felt when I was criticized, and it kind of hurt me. I was hurt by it. Of course, when you're ridiculed, criticized, judged, you're going to feel bad. So that's that one layer that I keep telling you about, that extra layer that comes into your parenting when you're committed to raising bilingual. And it happens. I mean, we know so much more now, and I think the world is a little bit kinder in terms of bilingual parenting, but it still happens. So the attitude that parents have is the attitude that the child is going to have. So if you're going to be okay, and they are methods, I mean, that's why it's a loaded question. There are things you can do for a while to, maybe, let's say the child is, 12 years old. And they once the kids are in school, they don't want to be different from their peers. So this is why that happens. because they want to speak whatever that majority language is. They want to be like their peers. So they come home and they don't want to speak Spanish. So then you say, okay, I understand, but in this house, we will continue speaking in Spanish. So let's do this. Every single day at dinner, for that hour and a half, 2 hours that we are at the dinner table, and after dinner that we are as a family together, we are going to speak in Spanish. The rest of the time, if you want to speak English, it's okay. And you, meanwhile, you continue speaking. If your husband or your partner speaks in Spanish, you continue speaking in Spanish in front of the kids, because you want that, you don't want them to you want them to see that you are committed to the Spanish at home.
Yeah.
And trust me, eventually they're going to come back to you and say, wow, I am so glad that you were, strict, quote unquote, because you're strict, but you're flexible. But that I'm so glad that you
Persistent.
were persistent, and that we continue with the Spanish, because now he's going to see that he's going to apply to that college, and they're going to be super excited that he's completely bilingual, he or she are completely bilingual. And then as they grow older, they realize, whoa, I have all these advantages, and because I'm bilingual, so I'm going to have a better job that is going to pay me better than if I was just monolingual. And also, not only about the language, but the cultures. Because companies see it that way. They care that the person also can understand the culture. I tell you, I mean,
that's literally what I do for a living. I'm like, it's important. Part of my job is to capture that aspect of what is happening, is to read the cultural temperature of what is happening. And that's the most generic way to put what I do, but it's to understand how that impacts a room. So no, I completely understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that.
So just, don't beat yourself up, and don't be disappointed, and don't give up. It happens. Know that it happens. And don't feel like, oh no, this is happening only at my house, because it happens everywhere. It does.